one or two of you guys asked me to go through my remix of This Feeling from Ryan Housewell. For everyone who doesn't know this remix, I will play that song. It starts with an ARP with Silent, which I also designed by myself with a simple saw wave and ODT saturator, some grain delay to give it more room, and also I filtered it with an EQ just to cut out the high end. And I also added some reverb automations to it. The second layer is a bass with an arpeggiator. Before I didn't want to write so many notes, so I just took an arpeggiator, and I also added a flanger to give it more movement. And I also filtered it to build up the energy. So that the bass is plucky and more clean, I added an autopan to cut off the tail of it more precisely. Then I added a drum rack with some hi-hats, which had the same rhythm as the bass. And so they blend pretty well together because the high end of the ARP is cut off and also the bass is kind of dull. So it first seems that it's a layer of a synth, but now it turns out that it is actually a drum roll which leads into the breakbeat afterwards. I also made these snares by myself, at least these ones. So it's just an operator with a sine wave and a pitch envelope automation. So you get kind of an 80 snare out of it. And the other snare, I just took the snare selector out of Ableton, which is a pretty handy tool. It's just a sample bank with many different snares. You can basically just scroll through all these snares with one knob, so that's very handy. That's a great tip if you work in Ableton. So the breakbeat consists of a fat kick, which has no processing at all, as you can see. And I also added a crowd clap. I've added more drums to the drum rack. The snare wasn't that punchy enough, so I added some 200 Hz to it, just to give it more punch. I added a frequency shifter to pitch it up, one of the many effects I use a lot. Also, I added a gain automation just to make sure that it sounds natural, that builds up. Like there are even like velocity modulations to even give more human feeling to it. To that break, there's also like a respace coming in. On every fourth bar, I add this flanger automation, messes around with like 3 parameters: the feedback, the delay time itself, and some like dry wet automations just to control it more. What is very important for respace is to just sidechain to the kick, which is already in the break. So it just makes sure the kick punches through and the track actually can play that energy that you actually want to show your audience. I just thought of like Michael Jackson beats, classic, and something that just works, which I just wanted to recreate in any way. I took the dry vocals and put my own reverbs on it. I filtered the vocals in the beginning, so it gets a more deeper and darker vibe right from the start.
I look up to the sky. What is it I feel?
I also added an EQ to boost some low end and cut some 2 kilohertz to make it more cleaner and like more radio-ish. I added some reverb automations, which fills up the space or like the sections where the singer is singing less words or is just holding a note. What is it I feel? But for example, this section is like he's just singing feel, but he's singing it like with stressings. So he's singing like feel, and I thought like, why don't stress that even more with an reverb automation? You could also hear that top layer. I had to automate the pitch a lot because I had to fit the key and certain notes as well. Give it more of a funky vibe, that blueness without it and like with it. So it gives more blues to it. So yeah. So in the build up, when things are getting more serious, I started to experiment more with weird sounds, even on the vocal. I had this channel before which plays around with the frequency shifter on the vocal. Where do I go from here? Since the frequency shifter had an LFO which can't be set on its face when it's triggered, I had to bounce it so many times until I had a version which actually sounded good, and the final version sounds like this. Where do I go from here? In the full vocal stems, there was also a part where the vocals got heavily processed with delay and reverb already, which I only filtered out and filtered up again when the build-up is becoming more intense. Pre-drop vocal is also heavily processed with a frequency shifter in the ring modulation mode to signalize that something evil is coming. I love this feeling. Also in the vocal group there are choirs which have been used in the breakbeat, which also in the build-up gets modulated by frequency shifters as well. And also gets controlled by an autopan. Every choir stack is being LFO'd with the autopan to give more shakiness and like excitement to the build-up. And very important, they all have the same reverb, since the human ear gets easily confused if you use too many different reverbs for the same kind of sounds. So if you got like 4 stacks of choirs, just make sure the total choir is in one room. If you got like other sounds, you could place them in the same room but like differently, panning and stuff, but I don't always do that. When I produce, I manually set the reverb settings so they differ from sound to sound, but they keep kind of the same. That's the signature sound. Either you save presets, for example reverbs, or you just know what you're going for and set your reverb presets intentionally like you want it. For example, I like to cut off the high ends of my reverbs a lot. I like to go between 1.5 and 6 seconds, and everything above is like for sound design purposes. And of course, if something is next to you more, you have to go less with the reverb time instead of having a long reverb tail. And if something is more far away, you can choose a longer decay time, even take more of the high end of the reverb, and maybe also place it in mono. If something is far away, it's not around your head. If something is around your head, it's next to you, but if something's far away, you just hear it somewhere, but you still can't identify where it comes from. The build-up consists of the kick from the breakbeat, which is already really heavy, and nasty sub drops. These are sounds which I've created with the operator and bounced them out afterwards. They got hard to manage sound design wise. Also warped them and pitched them again to make them fit. I also made sure that I sidechain these sub drops to the kick drum so they hit even harder. To make it even more evil, I added some brass shots. And if that's even not intense enough, I added even more bass, which pitches up. And I also made sure that its volume doesn't get too loud if the pitch is going up. And to even add even more excitement, I've added another tom-ish bass, which bounces left and right with an auto pan. So this one pitches up, and I also increase the pitch envelope itself. So yeah, then it drops. So these are the drums. After 4 bars, I added some rides and also a synth tone to the clap. And also added like a synth which pitches up with a frequency shifter and leads into the chords which are coming in the second part of the drop. Combined with the basses, the drop sounds like that. This one is an extra one-shot bass with the operator or silent, I guess, but I also balanced that out to be able to chop it more precisely and also added an erosion on it. Bouncing out can be really handy if you want to chop up certain parts of a sample, for example with the volume modulation. You can get really creative with it. It can give some nice variation to your drops as well. This one is a sub drop, which I've cut it with the channel on-off automation, just to give more syncopation in the bass. So it hits one more time in the middle of the drop. To come to the main bass, which already builds up in the build-up with a washout effect. So it's basically a filter with a reverb and an EQ to wash out the main bass before the drop. The main bass is this one. It actually is high-cutted with an EQ. Originally it wasn't, because I actually liked the sound how it was. But back then I had that rule in my mind that I need an extra sub, and also today I would agree in many cases an extra sub is very helpful. For example, if you pitch up your sub differently like your actual main bass. So if your main bass is doing but your sub bass is like things can get really crazy and really sick. So my main bass consists of a lot of effects, a lot of overdrive. Without all the effects, my main bass sounds like this. Together with all effects, it sounds like this. What I did was I just went into the operator again. I guess I should make a whole video about the operator because it's a sick plugin out of Ableton. I just took a different wave I usually take just a sine wave, taking something else maybe, and then I just added my sine waves on top of that. Since the operator has certain wave synthesis characteristics, it fastly creates very intense sounds with the right distortion. And I also filtered a lot with a filter cutoff to give that oomph feeling. I also automated the cutoff to the note. So every time I changed a note rhythmically, I mostly set the automation new, so I just copy paste it again and again and again. So as you can see, like most of the notes are like automated, but I have to say most of the automations are copy pasted. So it looks like a lot of work, but you actually just do one section and then you press Command LD and you just copy and paste your automations to your next sections, except if you have different notes and want to change something, of course. This is a badass rack which modulates the bass heavily. This rack consists of a saturator with an extreme setting. I also had this comp filter in one of my older videos, which is called How to Sound Like Getter. I just kept it and reused it. I've got not even one, but like 2 flangers. The one is being modulated by the macro. The second flanger isn't modulated by the macro, but it is automated manually. The first flanger gives the color of the tone, but the second flanger gives the modulation of the original synth. This flanger is being used in this part. So I modulated the delay time a lot, since the delay time is generating a certain tone since of its loop, and the faster you loop something, the higher the pitch of the sound is becoming. If you got a very narrow delay time, it sounds very high pitched. A very large delay time, it's very low in its pitch. I made an automation which sounds similar to a pitch bend automation. And you also need a lot of feedback from the flanger to even hear that tone. Without feedback, it would sound like that. With feedback, it sounds like that. But the feedback can sound very weird, very fast, so I didn't went to the 99 points, I went to like a bit less, so it doesn't sound that extreme. And after you shape that sound, you can start to control it with a dry wet. So how much of that modulation is actually shining through the original sound. Also, I've used ODT and the glue compressor to keep those modulations controlled. Then I went on with like other effects to high pass stuff at the end of like intros, or like adding reverb automations within a drop to get that swooshy effect again. This time I even used the reverb for creating more rhythm. Without the reverb it will sound like that. So it gives more like bouncing back and forward. Controlled it again, and after I had my rhythm, I added my OTTs and the enhanced setting of Ableton's Overdrive. Just to give more brightness to it, just a little bit, to make that one layer sound like 5 layers. Also, in the transitions in the drop, I went up with the cutoff. And I high-passed the main bass again. This sound right here is also created by an intense filter cutoff automation, and the rack I have shown you before. So my sub bass is an actual copy of the main bass, but with the only difference that it's high cutted. I even have those reverb automations from the main bass layer on the sub. No one hears that, so it's fine. Every automation is still the same. I just thought I need a sub bass. I just duplicate it and high cut it, and that's it. And make it louder maybe a bit. That was also the only issue with creating a good sub bass. I really liked the sub bass from the main bass already, and I also tried to add a new sub bass, like a clean one, a clean sine wave, or like a filtered saw wave, but nothing really worked out that well, so I just turned up the volume of the sub bass, in this case a little bit more. So in the end I just took the same patch. I also sent the main bass to some buses, for example my reverb bus, which I didn't really want to have on the bass. To that bass I added some synth chord stacks on top, which are also built quite simply, but simply complex. I took the filter cutoff and set the wops with that, so it makes like wah. In the first like 16 beats it's not detuned at all, but like then suddenly it is very detuned. That gives a kind of a unique touch to a chord stack. Also right here you can hear that it's very thin, but then it gets like a subtle touch of detuning, and then I added my OTTs and flangers. The flanger is an extreme widening tool, for me at least. Added some dimension expander to it, some reverb automations, which are very key in this remix. And when I didn't automate the reverb wet gain, I automated the channel itself, like the on-off automations to set the rhythm. I also added a frequency shifter to it, which only does something in the alternative second drop. If you want, I can show it to you in the end, but don't skip the video right now, just because of that. The ping pong delay is just something for like transitional purposes. Then with the width, I just put those synth plugs, whatever. I just put them mono and just let them disappear, since the second break is already starting and the pianos on the sides are like coming again, and one disappears and something new is coming, and that way I make those transitions. Also with a lot of filtering, which really emphasizes this effect. Before those chord stacks are even coming in the drop, there are some plugs which are being played in the drop. These were originally in the breaks, since this remix was actually an original before, but I didn't have a proper break. But I could make a proper break with vocals, so some things shifted in the project. That's just a sine plug with pitch envelope, with a lot of overdrive, reverb, ODT, reverb to create that swoosh effect again and compress it a lot. We also got this one, kind of like an hex swap created with the operator, overdrive, some EQing, flanging and reverb. So that's just a saw wave with a filter cutoff, and the opening of the filter cutoff creates, together with saturators and the reverbs, huge screaming synth. I also added that screamy saw wave in the second part of the drop, which I also panned from the left to the right, and added a lot of reverb and overdrive, a similar processing to the hex swaps from before. When it came down to effects, I kept it simple and I just used my old effects, which I have for a long time, and just reused them at every part of the track. Where do I go? Where do I go from here? I really like that part because all the reverb is going away and everything is dry. So that's kind of a sick style, which I really love. For example, the producer of Billie Eilish, I heard a couple of tracks were like silence, like complete dead silence, and like the whole track is like coming up, and that's crazy. I just like that. Where do I go? Where do I go from here? Even like the top layers of the vocal are being cut away from the reverb. And also with the main vocal, of course. Where do I go? Where do I go from here? Just turn off the reverb completely. And I even add a bandpass EQ, which is on the group. Where do I go? Where do I go from here? Afterwards, I left it mono and I widened it up again, so it leads to the second breakbeat more smoothly. And since I just had a simple vocal with the same harmonies over and over again, I changed up the melodies of the vocal manually before the second breakbeat, so it feels like there is more change to it. I love this feeling, love this feeling. The second breakbeat is basically copy-pasted, so there's not much changed. And I also want to talk about the organic stuff, which is playing the second break. So we got some strings. Which are like being controlled with gain automations, also crunched up with a saturator and filtered by an EQ. And we also got some phasers going on, but that's like very subtle, just to change up the original Omnisphere patch a bit more, to make it more unique, to give it a different color. I filtered that up. In this part, I added an auto pan to make it wobble a bit. Even in the build-up, there are things being modulated by LFO. This is also like an element which reflects something that was before, the feeling of being reminded of something, but it also seems like something new because it's placed somewhere else. And I also added a piano, which I have layered with some bells, some erosion, ping pong delay. It's quite of a basic sound, but like afterwards I took some nice reverbs. If you can still remember the vocals, which have been cut away from the reverbs, I also did that with the piano. I did that with almost every sound just to create that clean cutting out effect of reverb. I also added slight orchestra drums. And then 808. I pitched up the 808s as if they were snares, so it's still very bassy, but also very melodic in a sense. The second build-up is different from the first build-up because I added some more snares. So this is like my 80s snare I built with the operator. It's just some sine wave with white noise and heavily compressed, and also added some reverb to it. This is also the snare, which also pitches up, and it also has like velocity modulations to make it more human, to build up more and more energy, because the second drop is like even more heavy, so the build up needs even more energy and also like variation from the first one. So in the second build up I even added the last hit that gives the last oomph before the drop. I just took that sample from the samples before, from the sub drops. And also the first and the second build-up has a pre-drop which has piano samples reversed. So they introduced the drop not by the sound of the synth, but more like of the mood of the whole track. It reminds me of No Limits when I also used piano reverb shots to create a certain ambience, but in this case I took it as a pre-drop reversed synth. The second drop is more chopped up and has stuttery effects due to those channel on-off automations. So without those automations it would sound like that. But like with those automations it sounds like that. And also the sub bass has those automations to keep everything tight and clean. And so no synth tail and no sub tail, no reverb tail, no nothing is decaying into the next beats where something else is playing. So that's a very effective way to clean up your mix. You could also render something out in audio and just cut it out, but who has the time to render everything in audio and to search all those parts? I just automate it really quick while I'm producing. That's also very handy. So in the second drop I went a bit more melodic with the bass. Please donate for a better PC. I even started to add the breath of the singer to give more like that poof effect, getting even more heavy. So in the second drop I kept everything so tight and so cut out that every element becomes even more of a contrast to each other. I also chopped up that bass one shot right before the kick, so it sounds like the whole beat is getting ripped in 3 parts. So it's getting very aggressive right here, but still keeps its melodic characters. So yeah, that's basically the whole track. The whole part on the left is just the radio edit. We can peep in really quick. So yeah, that's just the track without the DJ intro. I want to show you an attempt to create a dubstep second drop, but I dumped it because I knew that the label where I was releasing that remix, I wasn't quite sure if they would like a dubstep drop, so I just kept it apart. Yeah, but I actually wanted to make an in dubstep drop resampling. I just had to resample it because my CPU was just dying, so yeah. Yeah, the last bit was kind of crazy and uncontrolled, but yeah, like I said, that was just like an alternative drop, which I just wanted to show you. So in that Alter, meine Stimme. So in that dubstep drop, I just changed the automations to the new rhythm. I had shorter notes, so I made some whoop sounds, like a triangle wave shape. I just changed all the automations to the notes and made even more exceptions. And also exaggerated my rags. I also could have done it like that. That sounds sick. But yeah, I guess that was the whole track. And my master chain is basically just again an ODT, saturator, some EQ, and limiting. So my master isn't that complex. The only more complex thing is like the volume automation, which is at the very end. But yeah, that's just for like a fade out within the project, so I don't have to do that like afterwards with like a fade in and out and like consolidating and then like rendering out again. That's unnecessary. If I can do something in the project, I just do it in the project. So yeah, I hope you liked that video. I also made a walkthrough video of my track No Limits, which got released on Spinning Records Hexagon. So if you want to check that out, I will put the link in the description. If you still have like any questions about that project, just let me know and I will answer it in the comments. Right now it's like 1 a.m. So yeah, have a good night and see you in the next video.